Jennifer Martin has told the same exact story to authorities and others for 36 years, never deviating from it. Recently, she told her story again to an Albuquerque high school student who was compiling scary stories for his high school paper for Halloween. The student recorded her story, then transcribed it. This is a story as was transcribed by the student. The story I'm about to tell you is exactly as it happened. I know what I saw. It was March 11th, 1986, back in Socorro, New Mexico. To this day, I remember almost every detail from that night. The sounds, the smells, the images in my head, even though I was only 13 years old at the time. My father and I were coming back from my school, having just attended a play I was involved in. My mother died when I was a baby, so it was just my father and I. He was hard-working, having been a mechanic for most of his life. He was a good man and did the best he could raising me by himself. After my mother died, it really affected him. To the point, I don't think he ever wanted to date another woman. He loved my mother that much. I'm sorry. I don't mean to cry. It makes me emotional when I talk about this. It hurts to talk about it, but I want people to know the truth of what happened. I apologize. Back to the events that took place that night. The only thing I've ever been unsure of was the exact time it all started. It was just starting to get dark, but still light enough to see when it all started. It was March, so it must have been around 8 o'clock. Back then, Socorro was pretty much desolate. Not a lot of people living there at the time. It was one of those towns where everyone knew everyone. The drive from my school to our home was mostly desert, so you could see for miles in any direction. As we were driving, having a conversation about what to eat for dinner, I'll never forget. My father was speaking, then suddenly he stopped and was looking to his right. The expression on his face was like he'd seen something that shook his core. This frightened me because never in my life had I seen my father scared of anything. I grew up thinking he was the bravest man alive, so my body immediately shook all over from fear. I slowly turned my head to see what he was looking at, and saw the strangest thing I'd ever seen. It was a little girl, off in the distance. She was slowly walking away from the road with her back turned to us. Judging by her size, she was perhaps 6 or 7 years old. She had an old dress on, and her hair was a mess. My first thought was she was homeless. My father then said under his breath, but loud enough for me to hear, "What the hell is going on?" No sooner had he said that, he slowly started pulling the truck over to the side of the road. He looked over at me and asked, "What should we do, Bug?" Bug was the nickname he gave me and what he's called me since I could remember. I looked at him and said, "I'm not sure, Dad. I don't have a good feeling about this. Something doesn't feel right to me." "I know what you mean. I'm getting a weird feeling too. I don't want to just leave her here if she's lost or something bad has happened to her," he responded. "Maybe we should go tell Sheriff Dixon and have him come take a look," I said. "Yeah, that's a good idea, but what if she keeps wandering through the desert before they can get here? It's a 20-minute drive to the sheriff's station from here, then another 20 minutes for them to get back here. She could be long gone by then. She's just a little kid," replied my dad. "I know, Dad, but I'm getting a bad feeling in my stomach about this," I responded. No sooner had I expressed my feelings, my dad turned off the truck, started slowly getting out, shut the door, and started walking towards the little girl in the desert. He was always stubborn, and I knew once he had his mind made up on something, there was nothing I could say to change it. I got out of the truck also, but just stood by the door, deciding whether or not I should follow him. I tried moving, but I was frozen with fear. I stood there anxiously watching him as he walked out to the girl. The bad feeling in my stomach got stronger as he got closer to her. When he got within a few feet of the girl, she paused, without turning around. My dad suddenly stopped as well. They both stood there, not moving for what seemed like minutes, when suddenly my dad turned around and started walking back towards the truck. The girl still standing there, not moving. As my dad got closer to the truck, I could see his face, and could clearly see something was not right. When he got within talking distance of me, I asked him, "What happened, Dad? What's wrong?" He didn't respond. He just kept walking around the truck and got inside. I immediately jumped in the truck, looked at him, and asked again, "Dad, what's wrong? What happened?" He didn't utter a word. His face was expressionless as he stared out the windshield of the truck. By this time, I was starting to get very worried. My dad was like a rock to me. Nothing ever fazed him. Again, to me he was the strongest man on earth. So you can understand me being extremely worried at this point. Minutes of silence went by before he started up the truck, put it in drive, and started driving. All the while he was silent. He wouldn't even look at me. As we drove, I looked out the window to my right to see if the girl was still there. She was nowhere in sight. A lot of thoughts raced through my head, and I thought it best if I didn't keep pushing him to talk. So I sat there in silence during the drive home. When he pulled into the driveway on the side of our house, he stopped the truck, got out, and walked straight inside without even looking at me. By this time, I was really panicking. Tears streamed down my face as I was at a complete loss as to what I should do next. I wasn't even sure I wanted to go inside the house with my dad acting as strange as he was. After a few minutes, I mustered up enough courage, got out of the truck, and proceeded to walk towards the house. It was almost pitch black now, and as I got closer to the house, I could see my dad hadn't turned on any lights, and the door leading into the kitchen was wide open. Chills went up my spine, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. I was getting more scared by the second. As I stepped into the kitchen, I called out to him, "Dad, Dad." There was no response, just quiet eeriness. I thought I should turn around and leave, but our closest neighbor was a mile away, and it was dark. Ideas raced through my mind as to what I should do. I flipped the light switch on in the kitchen, hoping this would help alleviate some of the fear. Right as I flipped the light switch on, I could see out of the corner of my eye the girl from the desert. She was there with her back turned to me for a split second, then suddenly disappeared. It felt like she'd been standing there the entire time. I jumped back, hitting the wall, letting out a scream. I screamed out again to my dad as loud as I could, but again, no response. I was frantic at this point and wondered if I was just imagining things. Part of me wanted to turn around and run outside, but I was also worried about my dad. I again mustered up enough courage and decided to make my way up to his room, flipping on every light switch along the way. His bedroom was at the end of the hallway upstairs, so when I got to the bottom of the stairs, I decided to call out to him one more time,